Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
President Salome Zourabichvili held her first official briefing in her new office on January 9 since leaving Orbeliani Palace at the end of last year, speaking of Georgia's very deep political crisis and stressing that there is no alternative to elections. She said she would continue to work to bring Georgia out of the crisis, including with international partners. She confirmed that she would attend the inauguration of the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump on January the 20th. The same day, Hudson Institute hosted an event named Georgia on Your Mind, an event with Salome Zourabichvili. The description of the event read the following. Mass demonstrations have been sweeping through Georgia since the country's parliamentary elections in late October, which observers widely regard as fraudulent. The crisis escalated in November when Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze announced that Georgia would suspend its European Union membership talks until at least 2028. In recent years, Kobakidze's Georgian Dream Party has embraced a pro-Kremlin stance, denouncing Western sanctions against Moscow, deepening Georgia's economic ties with Russia, and blaming the war in Ukraine on the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The party has maintained power by suppressing political opposition, civil society, and independent media. In defiance of these challenges, Georgians are courageously standing up to Russian influence, a noble cause that directly aligns with the United States national interest. Join Hudson for a special address by freedom fighter and Georgian President Salome Zourabichvili, followed by remarks from Congressman Joe Wilson and an expert panel discussion. Here are the main accents from Zourabichvili's speech.
The thrust of my presentation is to say why Georgia should be on your mind, on the mind of its friends and supporters today, more than ever. And that is because Georgia, as you mentioned, has been one of the more secure, strong friends of the United States in the region and beyond the region at the time when we were needed in Afghanistan or in Iraq. We were one of the countries that has gone in this space, called, I don't like the word, but called the post-Soviet space. It has gone through all these stages of building a democracy, building a state, building a system in which human rights and human freedoms would be defended. We have had our ups and downs, but this path has been steady, and the Georgian population has shared with its leaders until now the ambition of joining the Euro-Atlantic community. And the support to this objective has been 80% and more over the last 30 years in all the ratings that were tested in the country. So that is something that is really widely shared, that is the common ambition of the people of Georgia, and that is an ambition that was won a long time ago, in the centuries ago, to join the community of values that it had with European countries. Now, what happened in the recent years is that a government that had been elected on this same program of advancing Georgia's European identity, advancing Georgia towards its Euro-Atlantic integration. And in fact, this very party and majority was the one to introduce in the Constitution of Georgia an article that puts the obligation to all institutions of Georgia to do the utmost, use all their efforts to favor and promote this integration of Georgia in the Euro-Atlantic community and the integration policy. And suddenly, this ruling party, Georgian Dream, really transforms itself into a Georgian nightmare or into a Russian dream, the way, depending how we want to look at it, and takes this country gradually first and then in a more and more active way, away from its partners with a very aggressive rhetoric against our American partners, against our European partners, very aggressive against the ambassadors in the country, with, as you mentioned, Russian law and other laws that are very Russian in their spirit and form, takes Georgia away from what has been the decades-long path of reforms, trying to reform the justice system, introducing many laws to introduce some new standards, like European standards. The association agreement allowed us to go quite far down that road. And all of that suddenly, and it coincides more or less with the war in Ukraine, but starts a bit earlier. And suddenly we see the turn from our traditional strategic partners towards the non-strategic partners, towards Russia. And we see the country through a number of new laws being transformed into something that looks very much like the Russian laws, and trying to put our society under these constraints. We have lost completely our justice system. There is no independent court. There is no independent institution today in Georgia except for the presidency and that's why I'm so adamant to continue to incarnate this legitimacy. There is no independent institution that is not ruled by the one-party rule that exists in Georgia. So that structurally is very similar to what happens in Russia, except that we have a very big difference, which is that we have a vivid civil society that has not accepted to be put under the control of this one party, and a very vivid society that has resisted the Russian law not once but twice, the year before and in 2024, because the ruling party reintroduced this law a second time after having withdrawn it and promised that they would never again introduce it. But they are quite familiar with lies, which is also a Russian specificity, to present black as white and white as black. And so they're taking gradually this country in that direction, which is not wanted by the very great majority of the population. And what happens with the elections is not a question of competition between two forces or two parties and one accusing the others of stealing the elections. It's really an organized stealing of the elections that was well planned, well organized, and inspired, supported by the Russians, because it was so sophisticated and using so very different, diversified means that it's something that could not be just something improvised by the local authorities. And this is a new strategy by Russia. And that's something, and that's why you should have Georgia on your mind, because what is happening here is really the attempt by Russia to devise a new strategy using propaganda, using different interventions, using finances, using circumvention of sanctions, and using their friends in the ruling party and their close connections to have a hybrid strategy. And there they used elections in order to recuperate, I would say, Georgia, to try to make Georgia again as a country and a region under its own control. And I would say that it's the alternative to what's happening in Ukraine, not having been able to win the war in Ukraine, because what's happening, and we should also see that very clearly, that Russia is in fact losing the war in Ukraine by not being able to win it. Not able to win it in 3 days, as it had the first objective, neither in 1 year nor in 2 years. And that's a very major loss for the prestige of Russia for its projection of very strong military power. And in many different respects, it's a very big loss for the Russian military strategy and human losses, of course, at the same time. So Russia is devising something much less costly, something in which it feels much better at ease, because after all, Mr. Putin is a KGB man, and hybrid wars and propaganda wars and this use of elections in a different manner is something that is much more, I would say, in his realm and in the instruments that he can master. And what we see in Georgia is something that has been attempted in Moldova. It has been attempted in a different manner in Romania. And if it were not for the Constitutional Court of Romania, probably things would have been different. And if it were not for the Moldovan diaspora, probably things would have been different. The problem with Georgia is that we could not have the votes of our diaspora counted as they should have been, because they were prevented in masses to come and vote. And we didn't have an independent constitutional court who would have taken up the plea that I introduced in the Constitutional Court and that the political parties also introduced. But the strategy is there. And I think it's something that should be reflected, because it's not a strategy that concerns only Georgia or only Romania or Moldova, but can apply and will be applied, if we do not do anything about it, to many other countries when they have elections. We know that they have tried to intervene in different other Western European countries. So I think that it's the next big challenge that our partners should face, and that's why Georgia on your mind. But also for geopolitical reasons, because as you mentioned, Georgia has always been the stronghold in this region of democracy and of a pro-Western, pro-European country that was following its path very steadily. Now, if by any chance, and I think it won't happen, but if this Russian strategy were to win, it would be other countries that would be winning over this part of the world. China has very many interests linked with the ruling party, and the question of the next port in Anaklia, of the next airport in Tbilisi, all are at stake, and there are discussions going on with the Chinese. We have seen the Georgian Prime Minister of the ruling party, Mr. Kobakhidze, going to Iran and siding with terrorist organizations. So that is at stake, not only democracy, not only Georgia's future as a European country, but it's also at stake the control, the strategic control of this part of the world, of this Caucasus and of this Black Sea. Because the Ukraine war is also about the Black Sea, and the control of Georgia is certainly about the Black Sea, as the attempts against Romania and Moldova, because that's something that Russia is really looking at very intensely, knowing that many of the major infrastructural projects for the next decades are going through the Black Sea and towards the Caspian Sea and towards Central Asia. And all of that is under challenge and threat by Russia in what it's trying to do today in Georgia. So it's really Armenia's future, which Armenia has been extremely courageous. Its new government has been extremely courageous to divert itself from the Russian influence and from trying to come back to the European path that it had left many years ago. And it was always under very strict control and pressure from Russia. What we are certainly seeing is anxiety from Armenia, because whatever happens in Georgia means that they have a chance for their European future, or they don't have a chance. Because isolated and closed in as they are, without a strong Georgian partner in this direction and sharing the same values, it's very difficult to imagine that alone Armenia could really come back to its European path and to its partners. So many things are at stake in Georgia. And my message to you is that you have to hold on. We have been supported by our American friends and by our European friends in non-recognizing the results of the elections. And I think that is vital. If Russia thinks that it can get away with it, it will do it again, and not only here. So non-recognition policy, non-recognition of the non-legitimate government, parliament, and de facto president is essential to put the pressure. The sanctions are putting on their side a different type of pressure, because it's pressuring not only the leaders of GD, but also the first circle around them, which is what is like in any of those autocratic, because they are already an autocratic regime, a one-party regime. They are dependent on this first circle around them of privileged businessmen and of these institutions that they control and that are in their hands. So sanctions are really digging into that and weakening this autocratic regime and this pro-Russian regime. So all of that should continue, but you should certainly help us to strive and to get to new elections, because there is no other known way to get out of such a deep crisis like the one we are in today in Georgia. The only way is through new elections. New elections will happen. That's something I'm convinced, because there is not an example of a country that still has a civil society that is alive, that where an autocratic one-man rule, one-party rule can long resist when it is completely disconnected from its population, as we see. And now it's the 42nd day that the Georgian population is on the streets and doesn't seem to be weakening this protest, which is massive, which is all over the country and reaches out to all generations and all segments of the society.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.